Hey, Michelle, what are we doing today?
Hey, Mattie. So, when it comes to college applications, the 24-25 admission cycle really showed no signs of slowing down. And what we saw was students were applying to like 15, 20, 30 schools. There were actually a couple news stories that came out where students were applying to like 50 colleges. So, today we're going to dive into why students are applying to so many colleges and is applying to so many colleges really going to help their admissions chances?
It's a complicated topic, and the answer is probably going to surprise some people. Let's do it.
All right. Okay, so let's start then with some numbers. So for 24-25 admission cycle, the Common App reported a pretty significant spike in the total number of applications submitted. So there were 1.2 million users and they submitted 6.7 million applications. And this isn't like a 1 year spike. This has kind of been like a consistent rise. I think if you look through the numbers, you'll see it kind of started gaining momentum, of course, during the pandemic. And there's one number that kind of stood out to me, and it's that the percentage of students applying to more than 10 colleges has more than doubled. So in 2014, 8% of students applied to more than 10 colleges. In 2024, 17% of students applied to more than 10 colleges. So this is like a trend that's kind of catching on. So students are casting like that wider net. And I guess my first question to you is like what do you think about this shift? Like why is this happening?
Yeah, why? Okay, so there's a lot of factors at play. The first is COVID and test optional happen, right? As I'm entering this industry. And both of those, when it comes to COVID, I thought COVID was a bigger influence than it ended up being because COVID goes away and this has continued to gone up. But
Mhm.
COVID, like I was joking at the time that it was the same reason there were so many votes in the 2020 election. If you know about that, like it was like the vote, and it was because everyone had mail-in voting and everyone was bored, so everyone voted. So like
Right.
some combination, and this proved to be incorrect. But I thought a lot of the increase right after COVID was like students were bored and they didn't have much else to do, so they were applying to more schools.
Ah,
That one
okay.
has weakened because, well, students have things to do now and they are still applying. Test optional was the next one, and I think that's a good amount of it. Is that there are a lot of students were applying to schools that they simply would not have applied to in years prior because now instead of having a 1350 or a 1400 that they know would be like a limiting factor, they are test optional. And I guess you can almost scale that and be like, well, if I apply test optional to all the schools that I normally could not get into because of
Mhm.
my 1380, well, maybe one of them will bite. And I think that like that is like a multiple factor. It's not just they applied to like their dream school or what have you, trying it. They were trying to play a game and it's like, well, this probably is still not great, but what if I try every school with test optional? And
Okay.
I think results on that were probably like middling at best. I still think test optional was never like the golden magical little fixer that people thought it was going to be or wanted to
Mhm.
be. That's option two, and I think that one makes more sense to me. However, even that one, like test optional, is on its way out. There are schools that are now demanding test scores, and that's certainly not, yeah, like, you don't hear about it in the same way, like, that was it was in that's also what people were saying, like, test optional is driven this rapid increase, that was
Yeah.
probably the generally held belief, including and it made sense to me, but as test optional is now on its way out, it's still happening, and then there's the third option, which I guess, like, we're guilty of, that there's an arms race moving on, that
Yeah.
it's something that I understood intuitively or picked up immediately. It's something that I did when I was applying to college. It's like, well, I want to get into like I don't care that much about which school I go to. I just want to go to one I'd like
Mhm.
and it wasn't my issue. But maybe someone's like, I also want to like go into a school that'll give me will be affordable for my family. Is probably the other version of this. Well, I better cast a wide net,
Yeah.
and these schools certainly don't dissuade that, and that's something I'm sure we'll get to because, well, now they have more people applying, and the more people who apply, the lower their acceptance rate gets, and these schools like that just fine because it can be on the news. That then leads to an increase in paranoia that, like, oh no, it's harder than ever to get into any school ever. So obviously, you have to apply to even more this year, like to
Yes,
make sure it's
exactly.
possible. And that's probably what makes the most sense because that's a really nasty feedback loop that I think that loop in particular is probably the best explanation that as schools become more competitive, and by more competitive, it means there are fewer students who applied are getting in, that increases the stress level and the feeling that it's possible to like any school will not let you in because every school's acceptance rate is going down. We talk primarily about your top schools, Harvard going from 5% to 3%,
Mhm.
but also I'm sure you can look at the numbers. Yeah, like even in your second, third, fourth tier, all their acceptance rates are going down because they are simply getting more applications of varying quality, as we'll get to, and but that lowers the rate. That then leads to increased fear and paranoia, which leads to an increased number of even higher number, and that loop continues. And I think that's kind of what we're stuck
Yeah,
in.
exactly. I was gonna ask you, like, do you think it's because students are, like, doing more strategic planning? But it honestly just sounds like it's, like, this nasty feedback loop that's driven by fear now.
Yeah, it's tough because we're going to be talking about this almost as spectators because my students apply to a lot of schools. I would say like 18 to 25. If they live in California, they apply to like probably 17, 18 schools and also the UCs. If they don't live in California, they tend to apply more like 25 because they don't have the UCs kind of and I count the UCs as one school. So like you kind of see how it balances out.
Mhm.
I like the UCs because your Davis, Santa Barbaras of the world, they provide that net that makes it so I can confidently say like, no, we're not applying to Michigan State. That's bizarre because you're going to get into. Would you rather go to Michigan State or Riverside? And they go neither. And I go, well, pick one. And they go Riverside.
Right.
And I go, okay, well, you're going to get into Riverside. We both know this. And like, okay, so you don't have to apply to Michigan State. And they go, great. Yeah, like that is very much the strategy, and why that is because it is hard to get into college, And
Mhm.
although in particular, it's hard to get into the most elite schools in the country, which is what we focus upon. Where I'm thrown for a loop is I'm hearing 50 schools because that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
My strategy I built that we all work within like very much has applied to a lot of schools, but it is a strategy. It is like and the schools we pick are targeted for a reason. I feel like that's going to be different than what we might get into of like how and why students are applying to say a bunch of schools, like what their reasoning is.
Mhm.
My guess is it's much less structured and there's much less logic behind it. It's more based upon somewhere between almost like grind culture, like what gotta and
Yes.
just blind fear. And I don't think fear is a very good tool to use when trying to navigate the college admissions landscape. Like doing it because you're that doesn't work very well. I imagine it can lead people down the wrong path.
Right. And talk more about kind of like that trickle down effect where first this is happening where admissions rates from, Harvard and Yale are going down, the applications are increasing, but then it starts to trickle down to like second tier, third tier. Like how far is this going to trickle down?
Forever, I guess. Okay, so I loaded up a couple schools, Michelle, to try to answer that question.
Mhm.
And I do believe there is a floor to this, but it's somewhere between Boston College and like Purdue and Utah State. So Boston
Okay.
College, which I would say is like at the lower end of the school of like elite schools,
Right.
that basically in 2021 their acceptance rate it's the class of 2021. So like in 2017 their acceptance rate was 32%. Well,
Mhm.
now here in 2025 their acceptance rate is 12.6%. So it's
Whoa.
dropped precipitously. Yeah. Then
Okay.
I was trying to see how far this goes, and I looked up Utah State, which they've held steady. They're actually up a percent from 92 to 93%. And then I looked up Purdue, which is also basically down a little bit. Yeah, Purdue
Mhm.
was 60% or so in 2014, and is now 50% in 2023. So
Okay.
that sounds about right. Where like Purdue is kind of well, Purdue is it's Purdue. There is still a decrease though, and it's almost like I have to look up these charts, and it would not shock me if just because this data is available doesn't mean your average applicant or their family like is really looking into it. There is a general perception that every school is hard to get into,
Mhm.
and at least something I tell a lot of families that the college admissions, the difficulty curve. I think a lot of people suspect it goes like this. It's like it's linear.
Right.
It doesn't. My experience with pretty much everything, it goes more like that.
Okay.
And on this chart, well, Utah State is here, so I don't think people are that terrified about it. Then Purdue is here, honestly.
Mhm.
Then Boston College is here, and then we go nuclear soon after that.
Okay.
And that chart, I think, mirrors how admissions rates have continued to tumble. Because my guess is the people who are applying to more and more schools, it is primarily going to be as we enter like the stratosphere. I think it was a couple episodes ago we talked about how the average student applies to what was it, like 8 to 10 schools, something like that.
Mhm.
Well, I like to think the students applying to Utah State or Purdue or what have you, that's really their top school. They are not as caught up in this chaos as people who want to go to like a Boston College or anything in that tier, where like the numbers
Gotcha.
are
Okay.
falling. Like 32 to 12% is dramatic. And I guess something we get the ironic part is I don't think Boston College is that much harder to get into than it was 5 years ago. I really don't. It
Okay.
just looks like it, possibly
Right.
because 3 times as many people are applying to Boston College.
Exactly.
This is just an overall thought though, is that the test optional stuff, like, just because there are more people applying does not mean there are more credible people applying. Or even if they are, it's complicated because yes, there are more qualified applicants applying to Boston College, but there aren't more qualified applicants going to Boston College. They're going to other schools. Like it makes it a complex issue because it's basically you have students applying to more and more schools. Does it make it actually harder to get into these schools? I don't really think so. But then wouldn't that imply that the acceptance rate would stay the same?
Right.
It's and then you go to every website ever, it's like college admissions is harder than ever, you're all screwed. If you looked at the charts, and
Exactly.
I have to be the one guy that says like, "Nah, man, like, I don't know, I've been doing this for 7 years. Everything's always just exactly the same. Like the world's on fire constantly, and Boston College is fairly difficult, but not that difficult, and definitely helps to apply ED, just like it always did. I don't know. That's where this could be so strange for me, 'cause I understand how families get caught up in, like, the fear of all of it, that this is all coming down
Yes.
when you see numbers like that, or you just hear about it, but it's like it doesn't match my perception of how these schools have actually changed as far as admissions goes. That's the crazy part. Whereas similarly, from day one, I was like, if you want to get into like we go to this part of the ramp. Well, that's just that was and still is very difficult, and that's why you want to apply to a bunch of them to try to increase your odds.
And talk about like what hand has colleges had with this? Like their messaging, their marketing. I mean, some of this is fueled by their tactics as well.
Yeah, I think these schools I don't go as far as to say that they have enabled it, that
Mhm.
they are trying to actively make things like this. However, their numbers continue to it continues to become more difficult than ever to get into Boston College.
Yeah.
And I keep not seeing them doing much to rectify that issue. That they know that this is probably in a global sense that we are stressing out our best and brightest teenagers. And we are like the fact that Boston College is now 12% makes it less pleasant for your average high schooler who's trying to get into college or trying to go to
Mhm.
Boston College. That is different than I think that they, like, have actively manipulated anything to make this happen. They did test optional did lead to a dramatic increase, I think, COVID did. These schools have
Right.
not done anything really at any level to slow this down, and that is because
Exactly.
Boston College likes having a 12% acceptance rate. They certainly have not done anything to try to remedy the issue. They benefit from this, like, this whole process, they like
Right.
that, and I don't know if we'll get to it, is, like, that's why there's so much yes, in theory, these schools should have the Common App should have like an 8, 10 school map. There are ways to rectify this issue, and I'm sure we'll get to a couple of them. But no university wants that. They want their acceptance rate to go down because it makes them look prestigious. And
Exactly.
it really helps Boston College. I don't know how much Harvard benefits from going from 5 to 3%. I see how Boston College going from 32 to 12% makes them look like a more
Yeah, it's
attractive option,
huge.
especially considering
Right.
how we understand how people pick schools in the first place, fair or not.
Right. Let's talk about then how many schools you really should apply to. So, I was just kind of looking through some different organizations like the College Board, for example. They suggest 4 to 8 colleges is like a healthy range. But, we see like our students are doing 15, 20, 25. Like I mentioned, there was a student. I don't know if this is like for PR or why the students are doing this, but they were accepted to 50 colleges. There's a student in Georgia who was accepted to 155 colleges. Like, this is insane to me. So, and there's a term for this applying to like tons of reach schools, and it's called shotgunning. And you kind of mentioned it, but you're kind of like a pioneer in shotgunning because didn't you do this like yourself?
Yeah, so it's 2009. I'm applying to schools. I enjoy the college admissions process is probably important to add. I think it's fun. I like writing essays. I'm doing that with my mom. And yeah, similarly is I promise there at my high school, no one was telling me to apply to more schools. They don't really tell me anything, which is why guys like me exist in the first place, I suppose. I couldn't help but notice that well, it was a really I remember how much hard I worked on my personal statement, and I remember doing all the EC lists and all that stuff. And then I think the line it was like, "Well, yeah, like, maybe I'll apply to Vanderbilt," And I think it became a meme with my mom and I. It was like, it's just another essay." Like, that was what we said. It's just another essay over and over and over again. And that's how I ended up applying to like 20, 25 schools.
Hmm.
My results were that I got into every school that my GPA and test scores indicated I should have, and nothing above that, like independent of the quality of my essays. Which I remember being pretty satisfied about because I applied enough schools to build a data set of how college admissions worked in a way that my college counselors had never told me and made no sense. They made it seem like you just hope for the best and like and then maybe if you're a good boy, you get into like anything. Yeah, I remember
Right.
finding it just satisfying, if only because I figured I had a better understanding of like how college admissions worked. Similarly, I was the only person. There was a proto version of Naviance that had like XY charts, and I remember they never told us about them. And I was in like lab class showing everyone how these all these charts work. I'm like, I wonder if these are accurate. And then I went, and then my own results indicated yes, they were very accurate. It always made sense to me. It's like I want to play, but I and then it's my turn to get students in college, and immediately I was like, "Of course you wanna apply to more schools," and I think where it stemmed from initially was I had students ask me, "Is like, should I apply to X school or Y school?" And I would go, "Why don't you just apply to both?" And then
Mm,
they didn't really know. It's like it's somewhere between like because they've been told don't apply to too many schools kinda thing. I was like, "Oh,
right.
well, screw that person, they're dumb." And they're like, "But won't it be a lot of work?" It's like, "Right, but you're trying to get into college. Who cares if it's a lot of work? You work all the time." And they go,
Yeah.
"Yeah." Yeah, and then like also like instead of spending 10, 15 minutes discussing the pros and cons of Purdue versus UIUC, why don't we just apply to both? Oh, UIUC doesn't even have an out like yeah, like you can't write or we'd look at like let's look at the supplements and be like, okay, we'll write the one essay and change 3 words, it'll work for both. And they go, okay, cool, that makes sense. And a lot of my philosophy has just been built on me using logic and then the high schooler I'm working with going, yeah, that makes sense. Let's do that. And then there not being any problems. And then we do it that way.
Mhm.
The logic of applying to a lot of schools is I think sound, and there is variance in this process. Like you will not get in everywhere. However, yeah, even when I was in schools, like my first year, it was even students that well, I had no idea what was going to happen. That's part of it as well. I
Right.
was terrified that they wouldn't get in anywhere because I didn't understand that if you were 4.0, it's not that hard to get into Purdue. Or it's not that hard to get to UC Davis. Like I was terrified, and I wanted this to work. So I was like, well, let's apply to more and more and more schools. And I was gung ho about it, and they were along for the ride. They didn't care. Then they got into so many of those schools that I realized I was a bit foolish, and maybe that's why where, like, the 50 school kid comes in, that
Yes.
they have the same fear, these same problems, it's like, I cannot get in anywhere, and, well, while I can't promise anything, what I can say is, you think about the chart I said like this,
Exactly.
it really is that way because I could count on one hand the number of times a student doesn't get into a school that's in this level in my entire career. And there was actually one student this previous year that happened a couple times, and I freaked out because what is this? This is weird. And
Yeah.
well, it turned out there was a issue with his being honestly be considered like international versus domestic that was causing those issues. To the point where him not getting into UIUC early caused me to have like what is going on here? This is wrong. And it turned
Right.
out something was wrong. There was a much bigger issue at play. If that's not the case for a student, yeah, in my career, I can count on one hand, like in this range where it's like, of course you'll get in. Like your stats are good enough. They haven't gotten in to the point where if you are applying to 50 schools, that's where you're adding schools from. I joke
Right.
about the problem with top 20 schools. There's only 20 of them. So if you're applying to 50, by definition, you are going down the list to at least the 50th most difficult school, most prestigious school in the country.
True.
So I quickly cut out that because that it was 50 never made sense. But I
Mhm.
still also from my own data, it is hard to get into Duke and Rice and Cornell, and there is no guarantees. And I found there is a ton of there's like not quite chaos, but a lot of variance within it. Is that like I had students get into Rice but not get in anywhere else. I had students get into Duke and also Berkeley, but not anywhere else. And I quickly realized like, okay, with the stats and with the right strategy, which I was still developing, you need to cast a wide net because there is no rhyme or reason what exactly is going to happen.
Mhm.
On the other end is I haven't really worked with these students. I guess I know my own experience. If you don't have like the raw stats or you simply don't have like what the top school are looking for, I don't know if applying to all of them is the best idea. And I know that whenever I get a student who has a good but not great application, and I do not apply to Harvard and Stanford and Princeton and Duke and Yale, et cetera, with them because that seems like a waste of time and energy, knowing that there's just like the variance isn't there. Like you're not going to get into them. And like that's kind of the difference. So I
Okay.
think a key aspect of shotgunning is understanding from the beginning what the strength of your application is and where your range of variance makes the most sense. Then you are that is a much like figure out where you stand and then shotgun from those. I'm probably on both. Probably honestly more towards the more difficult end. But yeah, like that is probably step one is understand where you actually are likely to get in, and then that makes it more likely to go. That's where you build that variance range from. I guess is it's a bit different than like you have your safeties, your
That's what I was
matches,
gonna
and your
ask you. Yeah.
reaches.
Do you have like a rule of thumb for that? The reaches, targets, and safeties?
So I use a term called circuit breaker school. And a circuit breaker school is it's a target slash it's somewhere between target and safety, I suppose. But it is a school that I would say with like a 95% plus certainty that a student will be accepted to by their own
Okay.
logic. And often data charts will help you use your own Naviance, so you can figure it out. Well, Find one what is a school within that range that you are most excited to go to? Like if you got into that, okay, and then it often ends up being like UC Davis or for California it'll be one of the four UCs that are a bit easier to get into. The state option like a Penn State or UNC kind of those are often the case. Or it's often a state school honestly like whatever their
Mhm.
state flagship is. And we go, okay, so that's established. And then essentially I asked it whenever there's like a school, it's like, well, would you rather go to your circuit breaker school or this one here? And if the answer is the circuit breaker school, then we probably don't need to apply because you are going into your circuit breaker school. You will also probably get into this one, but like that is a good rule of thumb. Whereas like, would you rather go to Cornell or UC Davis? I'd rather go to Cornell. Then we should probably apply to Cornell. Like yes, that is now on the list. And that goes up pretty far until it's like, well, yes, you would rather go to Harvard than UC Davis is the case.
Right.
However, something that also notable is not all schools are created equal. It is harder to apply to Harvard than it is to apply to many schools. I recommend students there will be a follow-up episode, probably next time we do, where I'm gonna talk about how you actually shotgun to schools. I think that's
Mhm.
probably I'll save all this, like the how you do it. Yeah, I have a whole system of how you shotgun effectively. I think we'll save that for next time because it's its own kind of thing.
So then the circuit breaker school, I guess then looking at these students where they're applying to like 50 or more schools, they're picking, I guess, dozens of circuit breaker schools then?
Yeah, so where it tends to show up, the only way you get to 50 is it's silly. No, don't apply to 50 schools.
So there's
And
no
like
need to apply to that many circuit breaker schools.
Well, there's probably 2 motives behind it. One is that they are paranoid about not getting in anywhere,
Mhm.
and it's almost always computer science, and
Ah,
it's the
okay.
student I get is they wanna apply to Virginia Tech, they wanna apply to Michigan State, they wanna apply to Santa Clara University and Purdue and UIUC, and there are a ton of often, yeah, like state or lower end privates that are basically STEM mills, and there are students who apply to every single one of them and I do it because usually they're not that difficult, but also those schools are almost always due early, and I find myself annoyed doing it, and I kind of make fun of the
Mhm.
student while I'm doing it. The other option are students who are trying to farm financial aid packages, and
Okay.
like 8 years ago, every year there's some like news story like this student collected over $1 million in financial
Yes.
aid,
Yep.
and I respond, no, they didn't. They
You can't
collected
use all of it at one
no, that's not
school.
how financial aid works.
Right.
They got a full ride to like they got a full ride to some like state school in New York that no one's ever heard of where they're actually
Right.
gonna go. Like this isn't this yeah, that's not how it works. So I'm not privy to that. That's not really my realm. And if you want to do that, okay, like maybe he'll make the news, but I don't get that either. Yeah, those are the two I think like predominant motivating factors behind why someone is because yeah, when I am shotgunning with students, it is we are doing reaches, target reaches. We are going further, and that's why
Right.
I mentioned when I don't want to do it, I feel bad about it when I don't want to apply to Harvard or Stanford or Yale with students because I'm lazy and it's too much work. It is not because I have it's not yeah, but it's like that is different than I don't want to apply to Virginia Tech because that's stupid. That's a waste of our time. I just
Right.
feel like the number it's less that I went into this process with like a set number of schools that is the correct amount. It is more I've done it in practice. And when I am and it's part of the philosophy of this, like it's almost Candyland kind of thing. It's like I am the guy who applies to a bunch of schools with students. Like and I bring that
Mhm.
up and to be fair, students and their parents are very excited to meet a guy who is like just like, of course we apply to all of them. And there is no argument.
Yeah. You just
There
embrace
is no
it.
greater discussion. Yeah, you just embrace it. And part it's branding at this point. I know that there are a lot of families out there that are so happy to just meet some dude that goes, "Yes, of course we can apply to all the top schools. I don't care. Let's go. Like let's get to it, Zoomer." Because that makes sense to me.
What if one of your students, maybe they, like you kind of mentioned, where maybe they don't quite have the stats to apply, but they're like, I want to do all the Ivies, MIT, and Stanford.
That's trickier, and that's when I would probably explain to them it really is about like establishing where you belong kind of in the hierarchy of difficulty. And often I will begin that by saying where the student applies early. And the same student that is applying early to Emory or NYU or like Berkeley UCLA are like their top options. And I'm telling them that those same students, well, they start there to get to, like I want them applying to Cornell and Hopkins and Amherst and Williams, et cetera. Like I want them. We are still stretching where they are. However, you have to stretch pretty far to get from like Emory as your ED option to Harvard, Stanford, Yale, Princeton. And
True.
so
Okay.
much of this is just based upon my personal data set, my personal understanding of this process. The chart does go like this. And like I keep using that phrase because that is how I see it. And
Hmm.
if I slot you, well, here, yeah, we're going to apply to all the schools that are at the top and also a good amount as we come down the ladder like this. If you are here, I would put Emory here,
Okay.
you still get to go like this, right? Like all there, and you still probably want some here. It is hard to then keep going and have those schools up there like seem like they're possible because I will usually humor students and apply to the schools they really want to. And to be fair, I mostly talk about like hipster, like Harvard, Yale, MIT, Princeton, Stanford, Columbia, Caltech, and then Wharton. I mean that top tier of my nuclear launch codes. Those are the
Hmm.
ones I tend to be like, come on now. However, that same student applying to Emory, yeah, we will apply to Duke and it depends where they start. Whereas if I'm sliding them into Cornell instead, yeah, we're gonna apply to Penn, and I won't think the odds are very good, but
Right.
yeah, and that is part of it. It's like I'm the guy that applies to a bunch of schools, and again, like I'm sitting here feeling bad about that. The kid who has a 3.8 who wants to go to Emory, I don't apply to Harvard, but I don't because that's silly. It's very different than that same student. Yeah, whereas that's yeah, apply to just keep applying. Like, yeah, apply to 50 schools. Like, win $1 million in scholarships. Make the news. Like, do it. This process is important, as I say, and I think yeah, next session, like next episode, is going to be about how I actually do it, and I think that's when I'll go on a rant about what I've found when it comes to shotgunning. It's not actually that much more difficult, and that's probably the
Hmm.
ironic part. Is I'm not appalled that students are applying to 50 schools. I think they're silly. I think it's like you're doing it wrong. That is very different than what is what does this mean about like students they were causing them so much stress, and that's what I'll get to when we actually do it. It's not that much harder to apply to 25 schools than it is to apply to like 7 of them. It's not that hard to apply to 50 schools than it is than 25 or 7. It's really not. It's just a bunch of busy work. So like that is also going to go into a form why yeah this episode is not about like our poor teens. It's like that's stupid kid, don't do that. It's a lot of work.
So, okay, students who don't have a U, but they want to build a college list, do you have like tips for them? Like, how do they figure out where they are on that like kind of stratosphere that you showed?
Often Naviance is very helpful, is like understanding where your because this whole process scales based on like how strong an applicant you are. I understand that. We typically are getting students that have the stats. They have a 4.0, they have a 1500 plus. And for them, I tend to slot them into two groups. One are the 11 out of 10s, and they tend to know they are 11 out of 10s. They are students that are like their goal is like a Harvard, a Yale, an MIT, et cetera, like that. And for those, we apply to most or all of the most difficult schools in the country. So that's all of HIPSUM, MIT, excuse me, all of HIPSUM, Caltech. Yeah, and then their second tier, you have the rest of the Ivies, basically. You have John Hopkins, you have Duke. Yeah, like that is the majority of our applications.
Hmm.
We then also are applying to kind of a level below that, like you're like their state option, like it'd be like Berkeley, UCLA, UVA, USC, like kind of there. Then it tends to kind of peter out where that's when often they'll be like, I should apply to a bunch of schools. And I tend to let them do those schools on their own. So I bet
Right.
our students apply to like, it wouldn't be shocked they apply like 30 plus.
Hmm.
We're only privy to like 20 of them because I'm not helping them apply to Virginia Tech. I'm not
Right.
helping them apply to their state flagship that they don't want to go to. Then there's a level below that, which you just kind of slide down the whole thing, where like they have the stats, they're not quite as strong, maybe extracurricular wise. Their top school is maybe a Cornell or it's a
Hmm.
Johns Hopkins. Well, they are still going to apply to all the students in their range, as well as probably like maybe half or more of like your Harvard, Stanford, Yale, just because they want to, and the ones they want to
Yeah.
apply to. I don't give them a very good shot. I tell them that they're fine with that. Then it just scales down a little bit more. Where like we're going to hit harder. That third tier, that USC range, more schools in that, and then yeah, maybe I'll give a little more credence to the schools even easier than that to make sure that this all works out hunky dory. Then suddenly, if you have a student with a 3.8, which actually this year there's a couple students that might be that case, then it just slides down another one. It's like, well, your goal is yeah, Emory, it's NYU, it's like that range. Well, now probably the tier above that, like that's where we're going to be taking our pick shots reaches, and
Gotcha.
then you just kind of keep sliding further down. Where I would say wherever you stand you should be really aggressive in schools around that difficulty, as well as take your shot at the schools like a tier above, and even like be a tier and a half above. And then similarly, you want to make sure that everything's hunky dory with like a good handful of schools that are easier, you know? And the
Mhm.
whole problem is like your safeties, your matches, and your reaches. Like it falls apart at the top level because if the student who is gunning for Harvard does that really make Penn like a safety? No, like it's also a reach. It's
Right,
always my problem with
right.
that
That's
whole
true.
dichotomy is it only makes sense if you're on this part of the scale, honestly. As there are
Yeah.
safeties matches. I think I'll go more into it next time because I think a full episode of like take a student and actually do it. I think
Mhm.
that will be just as helpful for students to understand. Yeah.
Yeah, and let's talk about then the increase of applications and how it's kind of changing the admissions landscape. So, of course, the increase in applications causes acceptance rates to drop. And you kind of alluded to this earlier, but like, does it seem like the process is becoming more like a lottery, or is it kind of where the pool's not necessarily more competitive? It's just there's a lot more students applying.
Yeah, I think it's the latter. In my personal experience, college admissions remains shockingly and almost like frustratingly similar, like consistent. We
Hmm.
talked about computer science changing everything, and that is when it comes to just like overall admissions. Yes, the number of raw applicants is going up. However, two aspects. One, does not necessarily mean the number of qualified applicants is going up. This is my big argument during test
Right.
optional. And I said it was actually the opposite. By definition, like all these test applicants are weak applicants by the very nature of them being test optional. It doesn't mean it's easier to get in, but if you have a 1550, like you are now in a larger pool with less competent applicants.
Hmm.
Yeah, like the game is the game. Like I don't know. It's not, I feel like one of the things I didn't expect this podcast is for me to be the guy who's like nothing ever changes in college admissions. I'm sorry, like it
Right.
doesn't. You're entering now the fourth year work with me. Like you see it. Like it's the game is the game, Michelle.
It's true.
It's
We just play the game. That's
we
what I
just play
learned from
it. We
you.
just play.
Yeah.
Yeah, but even when it comes to more students applying to more schools, well, yes. However, it's students can still only go to one school, and maybe that's the part that is I need to spend more time thinking about. Is okay. So it's almost like a math question, which is why I struggle with it. With more students applying to more schools, elite schools, yes, it is going to be more competitive because there is just simply more applicants that are competitive. However, students can still only go to one school, so there's going to be more students. These schools are going to have to accept more students to make up for the fact that students aren't going there as much. However,
Right.
how does that still lead to a lower acceptance rate? And maybe that's the question mark I don't really understand. In theory, shouldn't it's and then you multiply the fact these schools are all scumbags and like manipulate their data however they want. No, I don't think anyone should panic, but and I also don't necessarily think that everyone needs to join in the arms race because it's become an arms race.
Mhm.
What's hard for me to separate is I think students should apply to a lot of schools because I think that's the best methodology to getting into college. Maybe that's my takeaway is my methodology is that yeah, you want to apply to a lot of schools. More is more. Don't spend any time deciding which ones you should decide to just apply to all of them. However, the caveats are like don't make it 50 because that's silly. You're applying to schools that don't matter or you don't really want to go to. However, the other half is this methodology is not itself based upon any changes in college admissions. This was my own methodology in 2009 because, like, why wouldn't I?
Mhm.
I've also made the joke that I wish we were consultants in 1977 because it would
Right.
still be my methodology, and there would be someone who like transcribes handwriting onto different
Yeah.
applications and stuff. Like I think about that all the time. Is yeah, in 1977 I would still have students applying to a 15, 20 schools because that makes sense to me and always has. Now everyone's catching up, I guess, and it's
Mhm.
hard for me to separate. You're right. I was a trailblazer in
You
this
were, I
idea. What it
know.
does not mean is that I'm continuing the arms race, and now my students are applying to 30 schools because that would similarly is like my methodology is not shifted by the fact that other students are applying to more and more schools. It is
Right.
just still I apply to a lot of schools with students for reasons that are not related to what's changed. Yeah.
So then does your strategy for applying early change, like early decision and early action with all this increase in applications?
This one is like I could say that early decision is more important than ever, but like I think early decision's always been really valuable. Like schools like early
Mhm.
decision. If anything, yes, like because there's these schools now have more and more applicants, they don't even know who's going to show up. The one way
Right.
for them to uh basically negate like all the chaos is to accept more students early decision. Yes, I'm a large proponent of early decision because I believe it provides a pretty sizable bump and it's often there's no one core reason. Like, yeah, schools like having their finances in order. If you're full pay, it's helpful. Schools like knowing that their students can't be sniped by other elite schools that they'll be
Yeah.
applying to. And in this case, schools like knowing that you are basically you are guaranteed to go there instead of the other they're less worried that like the other 30 schools you have applied to, no one will make you a better deal or none of them will be better. As like as
Right.
there's more chaos and more competition because there's more it goes the other way. That there's more competition of students having applied to more schools, they're going to have more options. So yes, however, it doesn't change much because I thought that 7 years ago, like, oh, decision's a good deal, and it always was. Maybe it's a little
Mhm.
bit better of a deal, and maybe that's the same thing. Maybe it's slightly harder to get into schools because it's more chaotic, but like it, the fact that it doesn't change my overall thought process is why I kind of ignore the whole thing. Like I don't know. It's more of it's more that I hope students are doing it the right way, and I keep it back. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like the next episode that I will come out will be me explaining how to do this the right way because I think that's what's really important.
And I guess another thing I want to ask is just kind of like the mental toll of applying to all of these colleges because sure you might get into all of them but most likely not. So with more applications could come more rejection and kind of like the pressure of waiting for all these decisions to come out. So I mean, how do students balance that?
So that is a flaw in my methodology, one that I don't bring up, but I know. My students get rejected from a ton of schools.
Right.
Our students. I sleep well at night knowing they're 18 by the time this is happening. They're an adult. This is important. Sorry, I don't know. Also, the idea is, man, this goes back to 2009. I would be much more if I did it the way I'm supposed to, or like, if I just applied to a couple elite schools and then
Mhm.
like my safeties and my backups, I did it the way that I'm supposed to. That would be unfathomably stressful. That's another reason I applied to so many schools in 2009, and my students apply to
Mm,
50 schools is they're freaked out. Like
true.
and they're scared. They don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
And over and over and over again, students applying to more schools, they want to do it. They feel better about it. And yeah, it stings to get rejected from a lot of schools. However, like when you catch one on the back end, when you get into one of them, you feel pretty good. Yeah, suck it up. I don't know. Like that is yeah. That is one thing I do think about, and I push it back because like okay, these are young men and women. They can handle the rejection aspect of it, and like maybe I'll ask some students how it feels, but mostly they're mostly happy and relieved about the ones they did get into, and if
That's
it goes
true.
well, it's a lot of them. I guess I should ask more students, like, how does it feel to get
Yeah.
rejected from, like, 13,
Right.
14 schools? And they'd be like, "It kinda sucks." And I'd be like, "Right," but then you got into, like, some of them, like, "Yeah, that was fun."
That's true. Yeah, exactly.
That is a nature of the beast, I suppose, and I just if that's going to dissuade you from doing it or you're gonna let someone dissuade you that way, then maybe, like, don't like, come on now, like, that is not enough of a reason not to do it, that you yeah, you will take L's, but
Yeah. Suck it up,
if it's
buttercup.
about this, if it's about suck it up, buttercup. Yes, if it is about the stress level, I can imagine it would be infinitely more stressful for me to be sitting there like I only applied to Cornell and Duke, and if they
Right.
and those both sitting like blades above my head as I'm waiting this entire process for two schools. I would much rather have 20 schools that are coming out in a nice orderly fashion that every few days it's time for a new school and it's kind of chaotic. That seems way less stressful to me.
Right. And last question is just to kind of talk about like admissions offices and like kind of the strain that this is having, just having more college applications to review. I mean, do you think that students are still getting the attention their application deserves, or is this going to become more formulaic? Does this impact holistic review?
Well, this year, I think like Michigan and Texas basically ran out of time, is my understanding.
Right, right.
I remember thinking this heavily in the COVID years and the year after because COVID this happened very rapidly. Like college admissions was fairly stable, then COVID happens, and suddenly you had all these admissions that all were having like COVID hiring freezes. Like it was already it's also a pretty chaotic time. Everyone was moving to
Hmm.
work from home, and all of a sudden they had like a 20-30% increase in applications for their early round. And I remember being like, there's no way in heck that these schools are managing to see all these applications in time.
Yeah.
This would be a question that I guess it depends on the school. And I imagine private schools, I have no idea. However, they seem to be getting it done.
Hmm.
You hire more people, I guess. Like this is the new normal, and we're now 5 years past COVID. The results continue to be stable in a way that I imagine they are handling it. Part of it is, if anything, I think that these schools have gotten better and more efficient at knowing. a lot of these like increased applications, I think, are not very strong applications. And
Right, right.
I'm of the belief that like test optional is a really bad idea. And if you apply test optional, if there's like, unless there's a really good reason for them to see otherwise, they just don't look at your application very much. And similarly, why I'm so believe stats report is you have a 3.7 and you're applying to Duke or Harvard or Stanford, they see that 3.7 or they see what raw numerical grade your transcript has been translated to.
Yes.
And you're right, they probably do have less time. And I think where they make that time back up is the students applying test optional or with a 3.7 or what have you are receiving little to no time of actual thought process. They are just being put into rejected.
Okay.
And that versus my idea that I believe the majority of increased applications are on the weaker end because I think the really strong applicants have been applying to a lot of schools forever. Like I don't feel like really am some cutting edge idea I've had that if you want to go to Harvard, you should also apply to Stanford and Yale and Princeton, et cetera, like that. I think those kids have always existed. I think the increase is weaker students who are trying to move further up and down up the board with for whatever reason. My guess is to remedy that, those students now get even less consideration than they did before.
Okay.
And there's some equilibrium that they found because business seems to be holding up okay in that regard.
Right, right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to the next episode where we get to talk about the actual strategy of shotgunning.
I'm talking about remixing. I love it. Okay. Thank you, Michelle. See you next time.
See ya.
I am now taking on students for the 2025-26 college admissions season. If you are a current junior who's looking for help specifically with their college application and essays, you should check out my website. It's collegewithmattie.com. And there you can see my services, my blog with other written posts, as well as book out a free consultation where you get a chance to chat with me and see how I might be able to help. Looking forward to meeting with you.